I woke up one day and I was like, I do not want to be doing what I'm doing the way I'm doing it anymore. And where I find the most pleasure in my life is to be among creators, helping give them the tools to make their dreams come true.
She's the founder and CEO of Seed&Spark, the #1 crowdfunding platform in the world for storytellers that's raised more than $95 million and funded thousands of projects. She's on a mission to make entertainment more diverse, inclusive, connected, and essential. We have the amazing Emily Best on the show.
Stories are what make us human. This is how we build belonging, and it is also how we collaborate. Crowdfunding is a profound act of community care to say, I have a story to tell and I want to do this in collaboration with the people that it might positively impact. And so crowdfunding is also a story of how things can get made and how communities want to come together.
To go from, I got a really good story, how do I actually get it out to the world? What does it take?
I would say there's two questions, one that gets asked way less than it should. The first one is,
Emily,
hello.
why do stories matter?
Stories are what make us human. This is what we do. This is how we build belonging. It's how we shape the future. It's how we communicate one of the really special things about us, which is our imagination and our wonder. And it is also how we collaborate, right? Shared story is all of this, right? And I think it's always kind of fun for me to think about how actually everything is a story, every single thing. The notion of a podcast is a story about how two people can sit down and what it means when you record their conversation. And the industries that have grown up around story really demonstrate that it is essential to our way of knowing the world. But it's also essential to our way of knowing ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves. So I think it's just fundamental to who we are as people.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of years of telling stories, like how we originally communicated and told stories and avoided danger. Yeah.
Yes, it can help us avoid danger. It can get us into trouble. And the ways in which it creates shared understanding is how we are a pack animal. Like it's how we are a group. We're a social animal. And the way that we do social, rather than like picking nits out of each other's hair, is by talking to each other and telling stories that we share.
How has that impacted the work that you're doing with Seed&Spark and anything else that's going on at the moment for you?
Yeah, well, over the last several thousand years, there's been a real battle for who gets to tell stories and whose story matters and what it means to listen to someone else's story or believe someone else's story. And similarly, capital has followed those rules that we have written, the stories that we tell about who gets to tell stories. And so Seed&Spark was fundamentally an effort to ensure that anyone, anywhere could collaborate with an audience or community that cared about a certain story and make sure that it got told, but also made sure that it got heard. Right? So anybody can stand up and tell a story. And if a tree falls in the woods, if a human tells a story in the middle of the woods, did it ever really get told? Who gets to hear it really matters. And particularly now in this kind of like, I feel like all we do all day long is consume story, right? Our phones are full of them. We're constantly being bombarded with content that has shaped how we understand the world. And Seed&Spark was really an effort to push back against the power systems that were saying that certain stories were not valuable. And crowdfunding, which is a profound act of community care to say, I have a story to tell and I want to do this in collaboration with the people that it might positively impact. Crowdfunding is really a way to say, okay, whatever the gatekeepers or the power holders think is what they think, but the people are going to speak with their voices. And so crowdfunding is also a story of how things can get made and how communities want to come together. And that was really foundational. I found myself trying to tell stories about women and women's friendships, and the gatekeepers would say really shocking things to my face, like, oh, you want to tell stories about women friendships, but could you put some lesbian erotica in it so that we could sell it? And they didn't even mean for lesbians, right? And I was like, oh, that's because you have an idea of how a story can be told so that it appeals to people. And that is through the lens of well, it has to be for men, for example. And that's the only thing that makes a story valuable. And I was like, uh-oh, what if you don't think that? Do you get to tell your story? And that was really the genesis of Seed&Spark. I made a movie about women's friendships. I hit a bunch of gatekeeper barriers. And as a human, I don't like when things don't seem fair. That is a characteristic I think my mother would tell you has always been a prominent trait. And so Seed&Spark was really my effort to turn what I had learned making my own film and in collaboration with a community into something that like any creator anywhere could use.
So what have been the results then with Seed&Spark? How much has been funded, like from a crowdfunding standpoint, when it comes to stories being told?
Gosh, like we're at the point now where like every 10 or 15 days, it's another $1 million raised. So the last I looked, it was 7,200 some number of stories have been funded. We're at about 87 million. It'll be 89 million by the time this comes out, maybe 90. And it just keeps going.
What stories have you found are most crowdfundable in a way, if you will? Is it Is it just like goes the gamut and it just comes down to how they're actually communicating the importance of that story?
There are a lot of factors that goes into what's crowdfunded specifically on Seed&Spark that may not speak to what's more broadly crowdfundable, because we're the only platform that is solely dedicated to storytelling and media. So we don't fund tech or games or comic books, things like that. Well, I guess no, that's entirely not true. We have totally funded comic books before. John Leguizamo made a great comic book that was funded on Seed&Spark several years ago. We tend to tell stories for people who have a hard time getting their stories told elsewhere. And that has led to, I think, a lot of people finding belonging on the platform. So 80% of the projects that get funded have women in top line roles, writer, director, producer. 60% of them are queer storytelling of some kind, 65% people of color. And I don't know if that speaks to the larger industry of what's crowdfundable, but I will say that crowdfunding requires an audience to understand why their participation is necessary. And so I think the crowdfunding that you see on Seed&Spark is an expression of what audiences feel like is necessary. And that is what's reflected on the platform. I think 90% of it, because this is where we started, has been independent cinema, like movies, TV, music videos, things like that. More recently, we've seen a lot of podcasts, books, music, albums. We launched in music last year. It's been really exciting. I'm such a fan of some of the bands and artists that have raised on the platform. It's very exciting. And so it's expanding right now, in part because we have a very like equity forward ethos around, hey, I mean, your producer's wearing a hat that says kindness matters. And I would say that's like very front and center to our ethos as well, is that one of our like very explicit core values is belonging. Another is creative energy. And that creative energy, the way that we talk about it is that we will be completely honest with what the barriers are that we are facing. Like Hollywood is collapsing right now under the weight of its own debt. We understand that causes huge reverberations and harm and barriers for folks. But our creative energy is always to say, here are some possible solutions that anybody can take advantage of. And here are the pathways if you are from outside of a major film market. And here are the pathways for if you hate social media. And here are the pathways that like we sort of refuse to accept that there are barriers to storytelling. And so we've really dedicated ourselves over the last 15 years, it's wild to say that, to making totally free education for creators that helps them jump over, go around, or ignore barriers so that they can continue to tell their stories. Yeah. So like to the original question of like, what's crowdfundable? Like, I don't know. I think we have dedicated ourselves to trying to make it possible for anything to really be crowdfundable, as long and what is crowdfundable is whatever people deem really necessary.
Yeah. What makes a good story then?
I think empathy makes a good story, meaning you and whoever is helping tell the story have to have profound empathy for the people you're telling a story about. So if you have judgment on top of your storytelling, it's going to be hard for people to enter into.
Mm.
It's why you see, it's why like, how do people play really great villains? It's because they find something inside themselves that actually they identify with, and all of a sudden it's actually much scarier.
They like really hook into that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
My husband's an actor, and he has played some really terrifying villains. Like so much so that I had nightmares one time, and I was just like, "How do you do this?" And he just like, "There's a part of it I understand," and that kind of humanity, that profound humanity of saying like, I can see something that I can care for in anyone. I think that's what really makes a great story. Relationship is really essential in a great story. And
How so?
Meaning the sort of central stories, relationships between characters, or relationship to nature, or relationship to place, really understanding the relationships that are being talked about is really important. And like, there's a million books about what makes a good story. But for me, whenever I find myself struggling to enter into something, I often sense that it's because like, I went to a play recently that was really beautiful and really difficult. And the central character was quite a difficult character. And I left and I couldn't put my finger for days on like why it didn't quite click. And then I realized like, oh, the actor was very judgmental of this character. And so I just sat in judgment of this character, but it made the arc of the show hard for me to attach to, because then, I didn't get the sort of satisfaction of seeing somebody I cared about go through something in a way. And so care, like profound care for what you're telling a story about. And that care has to get expressed in not just how you approach it, but who you approach, how you get the story out in the world, what questions you ask. My experience with this podcast is you've given us a ton of preparation in advance of being here, and I feel cared for. And therefore, I'm very happy to show up. I feel relaxed to talk to you candidly, which will make better content. As it were, right? You'll get better sound bites out of me. And so I think part of what makes great storytelling is just a culture of care.
What does it take then to go from, okay, I got a really good story. How do I actually get it out to the world? Whether that is a movie or some kind of screenplay, some kind of line production, a music album, even out from a business standpoint. Like, what does it take?
The first place you have to start is, what's your goal, right? So it's very hard to say what it will take unless you start with the alignment of like, number one, what do you stand for? Like, what is your big why? And where does this story or this thing that you're trying to get out in the world fall in the sort of like arc that you imagine of your own career or trajectory? And then you have to determine if I'm trying to get from where I am today to being a more recognized storyteller, for example, along the way, I'm going to need to make something great. Right? So that means I'm going to have to be really dedicated to developing the material to make sure that I'm not releasing it until it's ready to go. I'm going to need to partner with people who can really elevate the story. I'm going to need to have a really clear plan for how this is going to get out to the people who need to see it in order to elevate my career, for example. Or my core goal is to change a piece of policy with this story. I want to get this story out so I can change the way something is a piece of legislation, right? Then I'm going to be very dedicated to make sure that I'm working with the people who are already working on this issue. I'm very aligned there. I understand who the players and the constituents are. And then I'm going to deliver this story directly to the voters on the issue or the legislators. If I'm starting a business, I would say there's two questions, one that gets asked way less than it should. The first one is, of course, like, who is my customer? And what is it that they really need in the world? I prefer the jobs to be done framework, where you really think about what is the job they're trying to do that I'm helping them to do more easily. But the second is, what kind of life do I want to live? Right? Am I interested in being in the endless pursuit of capital? Or do I really want to spend more time in the company of my constituents? And I would say my career has really been, in the beginning, I was told that like if I was going to do a startup, I better be ready to be in the endless pursuit of capital. And I lived that life for a long time. And I woke up one day and I was like, I do not want to be doing what I'm doing the way I'm doing it anymore. And where I find the most pleasure in my life is to be among creators, helping give them the tools to make their dreams come true. And I rearranged everything in order to make that possible. I said no to some things. I shut a whole line of business down that I think was dragging me down the path of endlessly pursuing capital. And we are now more profitable than we've ever been. And isn't that funny? So I really do think that like focusing on the goal, but also the life you really want to live, and the way that you want to show up in the world, those two things have to be hand in hand to understand what you're going to do with your seed.
Yeah.
Right. With the story or the idea or the whatever as you carry it forward. And I really do wish folks would ask themselves more the question of what kind of life do I want to live? In whose company do I want to be? I'll confess, I've been to South by many, many years. I don't want to be, with all due respect, at any more VC dinners. Right. I want to be at the film premieres, and I want to be at the after parties where the creators are basking in the glow of having seen their work in front of an audience for the first time. You know, I want to be in the mentor sessions, helping people structure their projects. That's how I want to spend my time. And I realized like I had to tell new stories about what we were doing together in order to make that possible.
It tends to happen over time as well, right? Like we can have a certain level of clarity about, okay, this is a life that I want. This is a goal that I'm going after. This is what I care about.
Yeah.
And it's good to have a solid level of clarity early on, and it shouldn't stop you from getting started. You know, if you don't have that fully yet, there's a song that I wrote years ago that has the lyrics in it, clarity comes from not knowing it first.
Yes.
All in time, my friend.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's just this ability to be able to head into the unknown in that way. And then over time, it gets clearer because you've been exposed to new stimuli, new different challenges that you come up against. The VC example of yours, and just realizing, hey, that's not what I'm wanting to experience. These are the types of experience that I really want to have. And as you're sharing as well, that first point of really understanding, okay, what am I going to tell? What is it that I want to tell a story about? Why? That care factor of what do you really care about? You know, it goes back to, this is 15, 16 years ago. The reason I got into this all in the first place from a self-improvement standpoint, when I went down the road of speaking and coaching and these pieces, is a young boy took his own life from across the road where I was living at the time. And he was a teenager, and I was, myself and another neighbor, were the first over when his mother found him. And we witnessed everything that happens when something like that occurs, and witnessing the father come home and the grandparents come home as I'm looking after the younger brother and sister inside, who are only like 3 and 7 years of age. It forever changed me, for one. And out of that, there's people that need help, man. What are you doing about it? Right. And over the last 15 years, I've had the privilege of working with many people now from all walks of life. And one of the reasons from a podcast standpoint, though, because, you know, speaking engagement, it's only if an organization brings me in and pays the money to do that. And so there's only a certain number of people that get that. On the coaching side, or even a course side, there's only a certain population of people that do that. But as far as the music that gets released, you know, there's an album that goes out, anyone can listen to that. As far as the podcast goes, anyone can listen to that. As long as you've got an internet connection, anyone can listen. And for me, the take on that is that, you know, if that boy was still alive, that maybe if he listened to some of the content that was in the episode, that he might have found a different way. And that there's a genuine care. That'll be a care for the rest of my life, because I witnessed it and how important it is, because you never, ever, ever, ever know what somebody's really going through.
That's right.
And if we can be providing access to solutions that they wouldn't have otherwise had access to, it maybe enables them to live a bit of a better life. And so that really resonates.
Yes. First of all, wow, what a story. What a thing to live with. It's very interesting that you were saying, you know, the not knowing piece, because as I was thinking, it's like, right, you never know, wherever you're sitting, what it's going to take to get to the next stage. And also what's going to happen. Right? Some things just happen to us and we have to live with them forever. And then we have to decide as humans, what story do we tell about what happened that helps us interpret what it meant?
And that would be both internally and externally,
correct.
right? Yeah.
And humans,
that makes sense.
we are meaning making machines.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We try to, why are we here? There's no other animal that's asking that question. And actually, as you say that, is making me feel very emotional, because I had a friend who took her own life some years ago. And one of my favorite things, she was so funny. And one of my favorite things she said about the human state of being is like, a zebra is not getting eaten by lions going, is this my fault? Right? Only humans do that.
Yeah.
Right? And we are desperate to make meaning and understanding of what's happening to us and what's happening in the world. And there was a time on this planet when that made us a keystone species. That is a species like bees that made the ecosystem stronger. And it was our power to notice, to synthesize, and to communicate that allowed us to, for example, help like fish populations increase and help all these things. And subsequent to that, it has also been the same toolkit that has allowed us to kill each other, right? We can make choices about the meaning we make about things. And I think the reason that I talk a lot about intentionality is that even though it never goes exactly the way that you want it to, I think asking some questions about what you want your life to be like, to the extent that we all know you don't actually control it, helps us also, I think, contextualize some of the things that happen to us and make meaning out of it that helps us, process. Because the truth is, we have gotten very far away from the systems that help us process grief. And that has made us pretty angry as a society. And we have replaced processing grief with consumption. And honestly, consumption of stories right now.
Yeah.
Right? We're just doing this. And so instead of processing the story that we just received of the devastation somewhere, anywhere right now, we move on to the ad that's selling us something that was just handed right to us because the algorithm now has a story about who we are and what we like. Right? Because we're making meaning all the time. So it is one of our most incredible assets and also one of our greatest downfalls. And that's why I spend so much time helping these meaning makers, these storytellers, make sure that they are making stories in collaboration with community in ways that contribute positively to the ecosystem they're already in. Like, stories are never invented in a vacuum. We are here in a house, in a city, inside a festival. Like, all these things are happening. There's this huge context where all of this is occurring. And none of that can be divorced from the conversation that we're choosing to have today. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of understand what it means if I come on a podcast called The Edge of Possible and I say, I don't want to be at a VC breakfast anymore. I understand the context in which that's happening. I know what the consequences might be, but it also is more about me being honest about the life I want to live, because maybe somebody else who feels stuck on the fundraising wheel and all that takes and costs might be able to say like, oh, it didn't even occur to me I could choose something else. Right?
Going back to like thousands and thousands of years ago, one of the things that I learned when learning a lot about the power of storytelling, because I'm a massive believer in it, is back then, when there weren't ways of documenting different pieces, is that the reason why our brains respond in a certain way when we are telling a really good story is to avoid being eaten, for one, right?
Yes.
to avoid death, and that we have a similar response as if we were actually experiencing it ourselves.
Yes.
Because in that case, if something that was dangerous and we came across it, then our bodies and our brains are wired to give us a similar response to then say, oh, I better run away right now, right?
It's almost as if empathy is a survival mechanism.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, you have some very famous people talking about the danger of empathy, and what you are helping us remember right now is actually it is key to our literal human bodily survival.
Yeah.
And we had to tell stories so that you remembered it, so you would tell the next generation. Right? Before we were writing it down. Right? I will go back to what makes a great story. It's memorable. Right?
Yeah.
It makes us feel something inside our bodies, and therefore we remember it. Even if we don't remember the details, we might remember it in our bodies.
Yeah.
And that is essential to our survival.
There's a couple of things that you mentioned there of, first up, the way I see that, our ability to think, it can be our greatest asset and greatest downfall as well,
100%.
like liability there.
Yep.
And as you were sharing from a story standpoint and then consuming and not maybe being able to deal with grief, I would say that yes, and maybe a whole range of different experiences that we're not fully processing.
Yes.
There's a TEDx talk I gave a number of years ago over in Rome in Italy. And one of the things that I mentioned in there as I was doing some research is, and I won't get the numbers exactly right here, that people were put into a room, this is many years ago, and you had an electric shock that you could administer yourself with, or you could stay alone with your own thoughts.
I already know where this is going.
Oh yeah. Everyone said, no way there's no way there's no way I'm going to press that button. There's no way.
No,
like I'm just going to be here with my own thoughts. But by a certain period of time, certain percentage of men, I think it was more men, I think it was more men than women, but it was still a solid percentage for both of them. Which demonstrates that for many years, even before social, even before any of this, that so many people are uncomfortable with being with their own thoughts.
Shout out to my overthinkers, by the way. I see you, I feel you, I am you. So what I think is interesting about experiments like that is that they put humans in isolation. That's actually not how we are meant to be.
Right.
We are meant to be in community. And the thing that I think we are missing right now with all of this is community. And if you think about how many things that used to be community are now apps and gig economy things. The way that I learned that my now husband was really into me is he gave me a ride to the airport in Los Angeles. For those of you who know, you know, this man was in love. Okay. And it used to be that if you needed to go to the airport, you would either call a cab, which was enormously onerous, but at least the person was getting paid a living wage, or you got a friend to take you. And then you had the conversation you were going to have in that car. And then you made an arrangement for them to come pick you up. And I do deeply miss the days when you could be greeted at the gate. Like I used to go visit my family in Florida, and my uncle would be waiting for us at the gate. And I would always hope my cousins were there too. And we're going to get off the plane.
Such a good experience.
It was such an incredible experience.
It was really beautiful.
And we have separated ourselves so much from these core critical community experiences that require us to stay connected to each other in order to survive.
Yeah.
But also like the whole convenience economy simply keeps us from interacting with each other. I was running restaurants when Yelp came online. I was a manager in restaurants. I managed restaurants all through my 20s. And I remember what it was like before Yelp. When somebody had a problem in the restaurant, they would call the manager over and they would tell the manager what the problem was, and the manager could fix it. And that person left having had a good experience. They felt heard. They got their problem solved. They probably got a free meal out of it. And they were like, you know what? I will go back there. I'm telling you, it was almost like a light switch. When Yelp came online, people stopped calling the manager over. They left having had a bad experience, and they never came back. And they would go trumpet it online. And that would then hurt business and hurt businesses that had the infrastructure to help the people that were having a bad time. And like, sure, there's a lot of discoverability and like upside, whatever. But I'm telling you that like the community experience that you used to provide in a restaurant was severely diminished. Like our hospitality was diminished because people stopped going to each other and started going to the internet. And you might say that the trade-offs have been worth it or whatever you might say. But I will tell you that the experience of managing a restaurant became extremely unhappy after that, because now I was managing something way outside of my building, which P.S. I was not being paid enough to do, right? And it was causing problems that like could have been solved if we still had this orientation towards talking to each other.
An actual conversation. Yeah.
So I think that we have all these stories about how important technology is and our phones and the convenience, and we are not talking enough about the real community cost of those things. So I'll tell you another story. Because this has been reverberating around in my mind. I was hosting a dinner in Salt Lake City for a group of mostly chief people officers. And we were talking about the challenges that they are having with their teams. And it immediately became just a discussion about AI and AI adoption, right? That dominated the entire night, as much as I tried to facilitate away from it. And I was like, okay, we're going to lean into it. We're going to talk about this. And there was a range of approaches across these companies, and some of them were very intentional and very kind of experimental. And they were making sure that the employees felt a lot of ownership over how things were being experimented with and what they were adopting. They had councils, they had really interesting frameworks. And then there was also one guy who was like, yeah, you can't stop it. You might as well not try. No regulations, just everybody will figure out and the smart ones will rise to the top. And my lowest performers become my highest performer. And I was like, okay, very cavalier about that. That's the story he was telling about what was happening. And then one woman said, I learned recently from a friend of my child that there's a big environmental impact to AI. And that came as a surprise to me as a citizen, as a resident of the state of Georgia, where all we are talking about right now is the environmental impact of AI, among many other things. And I realized the story of the environmental impact is not being sort of evenly circulated. In my circles, we're talking a lot about it. In other circles, that story is not permeated at all. And I said, well, if I can share something about that I think is worth us considering is I live in a state where I'm actually being asked to pay for AI infrastructure several times over. I pay for it with my tax dollars in the form of tax benefits to the companies building these places. I pay for it with my natural resources. So the cost of, clean water is going up. And then I pay for it a third time because my energy bill won't go south of $400 a month. And I have been talking to everyday citizens in neighborhoods closer to some of these AI data centers where they are paying $1,100, $1,200 for a 2-bedroom house to air condition in Georgia. Let me understand, right? We are currently in a house that's 90 degrees outside in March. If we didn't have air conditioning, we couldn't afford air conditioning, we wouldn't be able to do any of this, right? And so I said, I want to share that with you to say that this sort of kind of cavalier, unrestrained use of AI, there are citizens, people who are paying literally for that use. And he goes, isn't that politics? And I was like, no, bro, that's community. That's just me as a person sitting, I'm paying for your dinner. Do you know what I mean? I'm sitting across from you and we are having this conversation and I'm telling you that I am having a negative impact. And you're looking at a human who's sitting across from you telling a truth and you're calling that politics. And I think that's one of the most dangerous stories that has permeated us is that the things that we used to call community, we now call politics.
There's a couple of things with that. When it comes to community and it comes to circling back a little bit from what you were sharing earlier, when it comes to actual story and having the space to be able to, rather than scrolling through, for example, and just consumption, is having the time and space to be able to process the story.
Yes.
Because if we simply experience a story or experience some kind of challenging experience and we just move on to the next piece or don't process the grief, as you mentioned, then we're not really learning through the experience.
Yes.
And probably even from a story standpoint, getting as much out of the story that you possibly could get out of it, because there was a beautiful lesson in it, something that you could learn and grow through it, which again, going back to thousands and thousands of years ago, that was there. There was the learning and growing through it that enabled for an outcome to happen at some stage in the future if you came across something like that. Yeah. I am a big believer in having time and space to be able to not only consume the story, but then also to be able to process the story.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that processing that we're not supposed to do alone.
Yeah. And that brings into the second piece, right? Is that, well, how much of that is alone? Because it is good to reflect and have time alone.
Yourself,
yeah, totally.
Right? Absolutely.
And it is beautiful to converse and to converse with someone that you maybe don't agree with in a way and have differing views. And if you can come together in a way which is respectful and with a seeking to understand how the other person sees the world, that's a really good space to be in.
Yeah, I find myself saying to filmmakers a lot that especially the ones who want to have impact with their films, that the movies themselves are not magic. You know what I mean? usually it requires a measure of intentionality and even aftercare from a film to help people process what they've watched, make sense of it alone and together. And just by the way, like no filmmaker's ever like, oh, I really hope everybody watches my movie by themselves in their house. You know what I mean? Like they all want it to be a communal experience. They want to know that people are laughing together and giving people permission to laugh. And we went to the premiere of the Indie Pilot Showcase last night. So these were 6 independently shot television pilots. Every single one of them was knock it out of the park good. I would watch every single one of these shows, even the scary ones. I don't watch scary stuff, even the scary ones. And it was so fun to talk to the filmmakers afterwards, where they were so surprised where people laughed at certain things and how that kind of like created a further energy. And then the people were outside afterwards sort of talking to each other about what they loved and making meaning out of it. And people were saying, man, if those were the 6 shows that were launching a new streaming service, I'd buy that. Right? Where great stories can build industry. You know what I mean? But it doesn't come from stories happening in a vacuum, right? That's sitting home alone with your own thoughts. And at some point, we need the zap. Yeah. We'd prefer the zap, right? That stories are meant to connect us to each other, to give us something to talk about. And one of the biggest challenges we have right now in the streaming era is nobody's watching the same shit at the same time. Sorry. Nobody's watching the same thing at the same time. And that makes it really hard to have conversations about the things that are impacting you. I find myself constantly recruiting my friends to like catch up so that I can have a conversation about a certain show. And then at some point that just like dissipates, and the impact of the thing that could have been has gone because we were not watching at the same time. We were watching alone in our silos with our own thoughts.
How did you come to care or believe in the power of story and the power of community? These are 2 very, very prominent pieces by the sounds of it to you.
Yeah. I was raised by 2 writers. My mom, a fiction writer, my dad, a journalist. And so my dad relentlessly asks, what's the story here? Or what's the so what? He likes that one as well.
What's the so
what's the so
that?
what?
What is that?
So what's the story here? Obviously, like he's constantly trying to seek what is the truth, the underlying sort of connective tissue, like just a sort of an investigative reporter till the day he dies in some ways. But what's the so what came from, he also spent many years in the scenarios to strategy kind of consulting space, because that was helping people tell stories from the future to inform their intuition today. And that was work that I was lucky enough to get to do with him for a period of time. And what's the so what is like, okay, if we're going to tell this story, and now we've all said, okay, we think this part of the economy is going up and to the right. What is anybody going to do about that? What's the so what here? Right. And then it's a matter of who's got the courage to say the thing that really needs to be said, because at the end of the day, like our gut is still incredibly important. Our intuition, which is really just made up of all of the stories that we have formulated from all of our experience, helps us parse the direction that we believe that we need to go. So for me, it's always been like, what's the story and what's the so what? That's just been.
You remember that right from when you were a kid?
Yeah. I mean,
earliest time.
My dad was teaching writing workshops. My parents were divorced. I was born in Stockton, California. And then at some point, my dad moved to San Francisco to take a job at the San Francisco Examiner. My mom went to Sacramento to take a job in cable. And I was just back and forth between them. Right. My dad lived on a sailboat in Pier 39 Marina, which is, for those of you who don't know, is a giant tourist attraction that happens to have a marina on it. Because that's where he could afford to live in San Francisco on a journalist's salary back when we had those. And he used to teach a writing workshop on his boat on the weekend. So I would just sit there and listen to writers talk story. And one of his favorite sort of opening exercises was tell your life story in 5 minutes or less. And the other person, and you would have a designated, so it'd be a group of maybe 5 or 6 people, right. But you'd have a designated storyteller and a designated listener. And so the storyteller would tell their story, and it was so fascinating to see where people started, what they focused on. If you only have 5 minutes to tell your whole life story, is it an anecdote that you think tells the whole, gives a sort of a broad view? Are you trying to get all of it in there? Are you trying to do it linearly? Where do you run out of time? Some people run out of time when they're like, 17, right? They don't even get very far. And then the designated listener would say one thing they liked, one thing they noticed, and one thing they wanted to know more about. And I think that perhaps even more powerful than storytelling is the power of listening. And it was a very concerted listening exercise. And I realize now why when you're a child of divorced kids, it's hard to imagine your parents were ever together unless, they divorced later in life. I was very young. In telling the story now, I'm like, oh, I know why they were together. My dad loves to tell stories and my mom is a great listener. And there's so much relationality in there. And so I think the power of community to start was what I saw when small groups of people got together and told stories and worked stories and what a group, what a vibe that created. I think that's where it started for me. But when I started making movies, the industry was not available to me. Like I tried and the industry was like, no, thanks. We don't think stories like that are valuable. So where else was I going to go but to my community?
Yeah. So did you crowdfund yourself and the original?
Yeah. So the original film, we built a wedding registry for our film on a WordPress website. I'll never forget it. I had a friend who then was like sort of a WordPress expert. It was a long time ago when WordPress was still kind of Web 1.0, right? Just uploading images was a whole thing, So she taught me how to do it, and I typed out like all the individual items we would need and the associated cost, and I put a PayPal link at the bottom. I remember I figured out that embed and I was so proud of myself. I was not a technical person. I'm still not a technical person. And we shared it across the social platforms and we just like emailed everybody we knew. And this really fascinating thing started happening. So we started getting donations to the PayPal link and we needed to raise $20,000 to close our budget gap so we could go shoot the movie in this exact period of time when everybody's schedules aligned and the weather was right and, all of that stuff. So we had this very like sort of time crunch aspect to it. But when we started emailing people with the list of individual items we needed, we started getting emails back that were like, hey, I've got a garage full of that equipment. Do you want to just come get it? You can have it for the summer. Hey, there's a local coffee shop in town that I think would donate this coffee to you. And they did 60 pounds of it. Did not taste good, but it was, who cares? Like it kept us doing what we needed to do. I think it was more a function of the coffee urn we had. It was very old. And so all of a sudden the community started to offer resources beyond capital that were personal and brought them closer into the center. So much so that for one scene of the film, the fire department just showed up and we had like a funeral scene in this movie. And the fire department showed up in the middle of the night because like, what did they have to do? And milled about and made us look like a much more expensive movie. Like we didn't pay for those costumes, right? We didn't, and so we started to see what was possible. And so instead of raising the $20,000 that we needed, we raised $23,000 in cash and hundreds of thousands of dollars in loans and gifts of locations and goods and services. And then we had a list of 438 people who had contributed in some material way to make this thing happen. And all of a sudden, those same gatekeepers who had said no were like, how many email addresses do you have? How many markets does that represent? And what I would find out is back then, if you had 50 email addresses in a theatrical market, like they could do something with that, right? And I saw the power shift in my direction from having engaged my community. That all of a sudden the gatekeepers were like, wait, now you have the thing that we think we're good at, which is getting to audience. And I had creators from all over the country start contacting me about how we did that. And at some point, somebody handed me a copy of The Lean Startup and said, I think you have something on your hands. You should probably read this book. And there was a story in the book about Dropbox. And Dropbox could not conceivably raise enough money there was no building a prototype of what Dropbox was trying to do, which was like the cloud, which didn't exist yet,
Right.
Right. So there was no building a prototype, like a working prototype. They were like, we need to help you understand the world that is possible if this thing exists. And they made a little movie. And that is how they raised their funding. And I was like, well, gosh darn, I know how to make a movie. And so we made a movie about Seed&Spark. And we included in it all sorts of nods to indie filmmaking and tropes and little Easter eggs along the way. And we shot it all over New York City with a crew that was mostly like, NYU student film and like borrowed equipment. And we released that movie that was, here's what we want to be true by making this happen. And we recruited our first 14 projects to the platform. And we launched at this great community event. And I sort of never looked back. And so the power of story is like instrumental to every single step, certainly along my path. And what I realized is like, we have to be ready to tell the story of what we hope to be true in the world. That comes back to that sort of original thing I said around being able to kind of articulate to yourself and others, like, what is the intention of the thing I want to do and the life I want to live? Because if you can tell that story, others can contribute. They can get involved. It's like doing a crowdfunding campaign of like, we need a pile of money to go do a thing. That's one thing. To say, we need to be able to fund all of these resources, or we need to be able to gather all of these resources in order to make this powerful story possible. People see their own ways in. Like in that original campaign we did for our first movie, Like the Water, it was a nurse who contributed the first aid kit. It was my cousin who at the time was working in like a sports warehouse in Tahoe who drop shipped us the bug spray and sunscreen we would definitely need to shoot a movie in Maine in the summer. Everybody was telling their own story about what they could contribute. And so I will say like that was it for me. Like I was like, this is how I do things forever. And the fact that there was a large community of independent filmmakers who reached out and said, I think this is what we need. I've just worked in service of solving their problems since then.
Yeah. And there has been a specific problem that you're aiming to solve. And what I like about this is that, one is that the moment that it sounds like, the moment that you actually took action on turning it into something came from somebody saying, hey, here's the book and sharing the book. And it took for you to actually receive that for one, and then have time to process that, what we were talking about earlier, enough time to actually then go through it and then witness a story within there. There you go, maybe I could do something here.
Yeah.
And so there's that, which I really love. The other is that people, especially when you can communicate a story, you can communicate a problem that you're aiming to solve. You can communicate some vision that you're aiming to go on, a journey that you're aiming to go on, that people want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
That they, if it's something that they believe in, if it's something that they care about, there is I'd love to be involved.
Yes. Because
again, that people are meaning making machines. And if I can have some sense of meaning within some kind of thing that I'm doing, people do. I've found over and over again that people want to help. People are mostly good, right?
Yes.
Yes, there's some asses in the world, but mostly people are really good. They want to do good. And if we can approach life that way, it's pretty beautiful.
I think one of the fundamental tensions that we're sitting with right now is that this money-making machine of digital interface and, increasing digital properties is kind of threatened when we are resourcing each other person to person, right? It's why, mutual aid efforts tend to thwart these sort of like larger kind of corporate plays or fascist plays, is like when an occupying force comes to your town and wreaks violence everywhere, has all the equipment and all of the money, the only option is to band together and help each other. And we're seeing that play out in places like Minneapolis, where, dear friends of mine have been carrying, getting groceries and taking food to people who are not safe to leave their homes. And that actually like that kind of community person to person help that we see play out beautifully in crowdfunding every day is also like, to our original point of what were we doing thousands of years ago with stories, it is necessary for our safety And it is also a threat to how we see power today, or how we wield power today. That like, it kind of upends Uber's business model if we start giving each other rides to the airport again.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there are real threats to capital now that come from just being who we've always been as humans. And I think it's important to continue to articulate that we are making serious trade-offs that we are being told create convenience, but actually they create disconnection. You know, like maybe I don't maintain the friendship as well if I don't ever need to, if I don't feel like I need to establish enough trust that if I get in a bind, I can ask you for something. Right. And that, I think the amount of agency that we are ceding to this idea, this story of convenience, is getting us in trouble now. And it's disconnecting us. And it's why we have a loneliness epidemic.
I think
right?
that's why it's really important, and it is. The studies have shown that from a social isolation standpoint, loneliness, mental health, from a depression, anxiety, suicide, each of these pieces are becoming. It's concerning,
Yeah.
and this is where I think the level of intentionality that we have around these, because at the end of the day, each of these pieces of technology, let's utilize that as an example, are tools, and they can be tools to tell and help to tell stories, right?
Yeah. So this is a very important thing that you're saying. There's a really important book that came out last year, written by Coraline Ada Emke, who's also one of the co-founders of Motherboard, which is a tech justice collective that I am a part of, called We Just Build Hammers.
We Just Build Hammers?
We Just Build Hammers.
Okay.
That's what it's called. And it traces the arc from of technology advancement in really like the last 150 years, from nuclear to computing to internet to AI. And at every stage, somebody was saying, this is just a tool. It all is how we use it. And some of the creators of those tools were reading science fiction. And science fiction helped us imagine what would happen if people didn't use these tools responsibly. And it helped inform them to say, oh, actually, just because we can build it, should we? And so there were folks at the atomic bomb stage saying, just because we can, should we?
Yeah.
Right. And there were folks at the computing stage, you know, the sort of famous things going around saying like, about like whether machines should make management decisions, for example, right? Just because we can, should we? And at every stage, there was somebody along the way saying, hey, I think we need to have a conversation about how these tools might be used if we don't create safeguards and safety rails. And at every stage in history so far, we have thrown those people to the curb, and we have said, any kind of regulation or any kind of safeguards inhibits innovation. That's the story that we have told again and again. And every single one of those times, those people have seemed real smart in retrospect, right? And so I just want to be careful when we say these are just tools,
Right.
because a hammer can be used to drive in a nail, and it can be used to bash in a brain. And we cannot pretend like the trade-off of putting a hammer in someone's hand might not be that somebody's brain gets bashed in. And that is true for every one of these tools that we build. And if we do not allow the stories from the future to be told of what the possible perverse unintended consequences might be, such that it informs how we behave around these tools and the safeguards we create around these tools today, we end up with a loneliness epidemic and an isolation epidemic and a suicide epidemic.
What do
right?
you see as a solution?
Listen to Black women. I'm dead serious. Like, do you want the solution? That is the solution.
How so?
If you look at every stage in history, who has been like flying the flag around being like, this is what might happen that's bad, that will harm lots of people. It's been women and people of color, but specifically in this country, Black women who sit at the intersection of both racial and gender discrimination. They understand they are the first on the front lines. They have lost more jobs in the last 5 years than anyone else. They are at the front line of the downside impact of every wave of innovation or pandemic or every bad thing that's happening. They're also on the front lines. And they see this before anybody else does because they experience the downside effects sooner than everyone else in our community. And they have been organizing in community for centuries in order to keep themselves and their families safe. And again and again, they get sidelined and run out. And that's what's most recently happened in AI.
How so? With AI?
Timnit, Sophia Noble, Joy, we can, all of these folks who have been like running back, read the book, Algorithms of Oppression, right? Like, it's not that we didn't know that all these downside impacts could occur. It's that a decision was made by humans at the top that the downside impacts were an acceptable trade-off to the money and innovation that came out of it. Mm. And that is a really hard pill to swallow for some folks, because our system, our story is that anything that makes a lot of money is innovation. That's our story culturally. And I have a different story about what makes innovation. That is something that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to help seed, which is that it's not innovation if it harms people. Mm. Right. And that's what, at the beginning of the advent of like nuclear fusion, there were people running the flags being like, I think this is too risky for us to make possible because of how many people it could hurt.
Nuclear fission.
Just we're starting to play with this thing that could create super weapons.
Right.
And there were people being like, I don't actually think we should make this thing.
Right.
Right. And then what happened? We destroyed a country for centuries to come. Right. Because and from where we are sitting today, we are at risk of that happening again. Right. And so I think it shouldn't feel risky to challenge someone's story. Like you said earlier, we should be able to sit across from each other and sort of have this respectful dialogue. But right now, stories of dissent, specifically people who dissent from the sort of like capital is innovation framework, are being squashed and people are dying, right? And the stakes, in my view, around who gets to tell stories are about as high as they've ever been. And I think that is something that the tech industry specifically has been very proactive in not contending with. You have some of the most renowned, I don't even like to call them that, tech leaders saying that empathy is bad for humanity. When you and I feel very strongly and very clearly that empathy is what keeps us alive. Right. And so we are in this stage where the stories we are telling are so far apart. There are certain story frameworks that are winning, but these are not just tools, right? There's no tool that is in and of itself divorced from the intention of how it's used, right? Or its impact at the end of the day. A hammer might be a hammer, it might be a weapon, right? And that is to the human decision-making around it. AI could bring us all of this tremendous, healthcare innovation and resourcing and make it so all we have to do is like sit around and paint. Or it could lead to the greatest wealth disparities we've ever seen, which seems to be the direction it's trending. And so if we don't contend with the stories we're telling about things, the fact that the story that keeps getting told is AI is inevitable. Why? Right? Why? And just that, why? Tell me the story of why it's inevitable, right? What if I had a story for why it's not inevitable? What might that mean?
What does a future look like to you then? Ideally.
I find my hope and joy in new movements in interdependence.
What does that mean exactly?
So interdependence is this radical notion that we depend on each other for survival and thriving. But there are movements inside technology to build solidarity between people, organizations, and capital aligned around making sure that we are building technology for collective good.
Yeah. To a certain governance around those systems.
Creating responsible governance, helping build people's sense of agency around how they are able to impact the outcomes of what's happening in their lives. I would also say that you see this in film. I'm a participant of a large organizing movement that is just getting started called Solidarity House, that is 250 organizations that have committed to working in solidarity with one another that represent a critical mass equivalent to a Hollywood studio, right? But these are all individual organizations that are in Chicago, like Open Television, and that are doing very specific things like Brown Girls Doc Mafia, and that are working on very specific corners like the Gender and Care Project inside the New America Foundation. There's all these incredible efforts that everybody had been sort of doing in silos. And now everybody's turning in to say, hey, can we hold hands and do this together? And so for me, the future is one where there's no getting around us going through the pain it will take to release some of these individual conveniences that we've come to expect in order for us to actually go back to really caring for one another.
And how does Seed&Spark fit into that?
Oh, well,
from a future standpoint?
I mean, we're just out here getting incredible stories told every single day. And those stories are being used by filmmakers to change policy, galvanize community, gather people, make them laugh, make them feel seen. I mean, I think about what's happening in our country today and this giant backlash against queer and trans people. And I'm telling you that there are queer and trans stories of joy and connection that are getting funded on our platform all the time that show that, like, they've always been here, they will always be here, they persist, and they are joyful in spite of everybody's best efforts to take that away. And so I think that that continued audience interaction where audiences get to say, here's what I really care about, here are the stories I want to see. That's what really propels us forward, because I do think that in order to get from where we are today, which is like a lot of chaos and uncertainty, to a place of greater connection and interdependence requires a lot of hope and a lot of imagination. And those are the things that the creators on Seed&Spark have in spades.
This brings us to a rapid fire segment on the show.
Okay, all right. Hold on.
Are you ready?
I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
So we have these three questions that revolve around values, beliefs, and habits and routines. Okay. So first question, what's your number one value and why?
Care.
Why?
Because I think if we evaluate every decision about what is the most careful, I don't mean careful, I mean careful, Full, way that I can move in the world, I can be sure that I'm not inadvertently making decisions that might hurt someone. And I'm constantly thinking about what I'm doing, not just for my own like needs, but in the context of the world I'm living in and the people that I might impact.
Love that. What's a belief that's shaped who you've become, whether it be a belief about yourself, about others, or about the world? That
hope is a discipline. I have often said about myself, and I don't think this is like a great quality, but like I am a pathological optimist. I am sort of incapable of believing anything, but that not only it'll be fine, but it'll probably be great. That's like part of my personality. But as the world has gotten more complex, as the forces have become more galvanized against what I would say just like collective good, it can be hard to feel hopeful when people are dying in mass, or when people are being incarcerated in mass, or when there's literally children in prison. And on those days, I wake up and I remember that hope is a discipline, that I have to continue to hope, because for my children, for the children across the world, for the children who are incarcerated right now, I have to continue to believe that we can impact their experience and their outcomes, because then I can get up and actually have the energy to do it.
And then what's a habit, routine, or ritual that you can't live without? And this could be daily habit right out to a family tradition, an annual tradition with your friends, for example, and you can go with both if you want to.
I'm going to answer with a recent tradition that has cropped up, which is I have made friends with a bunch of my kids' friends' moms. And we have started getting together once a month. And we call it Moms Gone Wild, ironically, because we usually are done by 9 p.m. We'll meet at like 5 or 6, and then we'll have a couple of drinks together. We went out to a tiki bar one time. We had a potluck recently, which was also really great. And we talk about everything.
Right.
what's going on in the world, what's going on in our lives, what's going on with our kids. We talk about like, how are you handling, their relationship to technology,
Right.
Screen time rules, or, what's your relationship with this teacher? We talk about our marriages. We can talk about everything, and it is local to me.
Mm.
And as somebody who works a lot in entertainment, it's also really lovely to have spaces where not everybody's in entertainment, because it tends to be like all anybody talks about in that case. And we feel so connected, and it's a network that can now be mobilized very quickly for lots of different things. So my babysitter fell through. I have a friend going to a funeral this weekend of a very dear friend, and she feels like it would be really difficult for her daughter to be witness to that. And so she's coming to stay with us, right? My husband and I couldn't find a babysitter for a date night for a piece of theater that we're really dying to see, that's being made by some people we know. And so our kids are going to sleep over at the other, and it is this mutual aid network that not only makes our lives collectively easier to live at no cost to anyone, but also fortifies our spirits and allows us to feel really connected to our community. And we are all really into it right now. So I think it's something that will persist. And, if you really want to organize something, give it to a busy mom. So I have a good faith that we're going to be able to carry this forward.
Well, that's that community aspect is just driving that home, right? What we've been talking about a lot of today, the importance of community and the importance of being able to be along with somebody else's story. The way I like to think about that is that, we might be the main character in our own story, but there's so many supporting roles that occur.
Also, all those extras are the main characters in their own stories.
Exactly. And then you get to play a supporting role. That's what's so beautiful about life and about connection and about coming together and that sense of belonging. And if we miss sight of that, we lose sight of that. I think we lose a large part of what it means to be human. So it's been a great conversation. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you
where
for
can people
having
go
me.
to find out more about the work that you're doing?
Sure.
And
you can go to seedandspark.com or at Seed&Spark on all the platforms. I would also really encourage folks to check out the work that Motherboard is doing. It's m.otherboard.org. We actually have a collective AI governance town hall happening on March 30th. So maybe this will be too late. But we're doing a lot of events to galvanize the community that is interested in building technology for collective good. And it's a membership organization. We watch movies together. We read books together. And we help build kind of a new canon that helps us understand what's possible for the future.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. It's been a real pleasure. And for those of you tuning in, we'll have everything that was mentioned linked in the show notes at CameronAtlas.com/podcast. We have some great new guests coming up. So make sure you hit that follow button, leave a comment, and until next time, go and write the next line in your story. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next episode here on The Edge of Possible.